Hi, Steve Sander here, and I'm at the shore of Lake Michigan, and it's kind of hard to see the beauty of it because of my camera's lighting here. If I can adjust it a little bit. There we go. Now we can see the lake. Of course, you can't see my face, which is probably good. Talking about Lake Michigan, I got the idea to, wow, we got a little red sky too. I got the idea to talk about Lake Michigan because one of the news reporters for the hurricane that has been happening down in Houston, it's a very severe hurricane, of course. It's a storm that's once in 1,000 years, they say, and it's devastated a large area of Texas. One of the commentators said the area of the flood was as large as Lake Michigan. Well, I got to thinking about that. I thought, you know, the flood is tragic and the flood does cover a large area, but the size of Lake Michigan, there's no way it could be that big. Lake Michigan is 22,000 square miles plus. Of course, Lake Michigan is huge. It's 300 miles long, roughly, plus 300 plus, and it's in its widest places, it's over 100 miles wide. This lake is so large, it has some of the characteristics of an ocean. For instance, you cannot see across it in its normal width. If I'm looking out there at the horizon now, you cannot see land on the other side. Lake Michigan is affected somewhat by the moon, and it has some kind of tides, I've heard. I haven't really noticed it, to be honest, but that's what I've heard. Lake Michigan has a strange phenomenon called seiche, where sometimes the lake level will rise and keep rising unexpectedly, and sometimes it'll rise to the point where somebody standing on the shore will just kind of get swept off into the lake. I forget the number of miles of shoreline it has, but it is quite a few. I'll look that up and I'll put the number on some text on the video. It also has some interesting islands. The largest island in Lake Michigan is Beaver Island. I was there in Beaver Island once about 4 years ago. Naturally, it was to do a gig with a very fine singer from Nevada named C.C. Gable. And we had a great time and had a great bunch of musicians for that gig. That island is actually lived on year-round. There are people who live there year-round on Beaver Island. And of course, the population expands in the summertime. I know it used to be a 4-hour ferry ride. It might be shorter nowadays. The time I went there, I took an airplane, and it takes about 20 minutes to fly. There's a couple little restaurants there, and it's just actually, it's kind of a cool place to go to. Beaver Island was the site of a Mormon settlement back in the 1800s, where they had this guy named Strang who declared himself king. And he was a Mormon, and he eventually somehow got in trouble, arrested or something. But there's an interesting history there if you want to look that up. There's a couple of smaller islands south of Beaver Island called Manitou Island, North Manitou Island, and South Manitou Island. South Manitou Island used to have people living on it until not too long ago, but now it's being gradually phased into a wilderness island. Some people still have cottages there that are grandfathered in. North Manitou Island is a little bit larger, and that is, in fact, a wilderness island where people can go backpacking. And always wanted to do that, but I've never been there. I have been on South Manitou Island, just on a day trip though, and that is an interesting place to go to. There's some shipwrecks. In fact, there are shipwrecks littered all throughout Lake Michigan, and that's a whole nother study unto itself of the shipwrecks of Lake Michigan. Lake Michigan was formed, like all the Great Lakes, from the glacier movement, and there is a history of different lake formations throughout historic geological history, and there are different shapes of lakes that took place, and they eventually settled into the form of lakes that we have now in the Great Lakes. There are 5 Great Lakes, of course: Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario. And actually Lake Michigan and Lake Huron could be considered one lake. They have a very narrow strait of water that connects the two lakes. Their water level is at the same sea level, and so their water is the same. The Great Lakes are accessible to the ocean through the St. Lawrence Seaway. The St. Lawrence Seaway was opened during Eisenhower's time, back in the 1950s, so that ocean-going ships and cargo vessels and what have you can have access to the ports in the Great Lakes for steel mills, or ore, I guess it is, iron ore, and other products. There are some major cities around Lake Michigan. Chicago is the biggest one. Chicago itself has 20-some miles of Lake Michigan shoreline, and Milwaukee is probably the second biggest city. And then if you go further north in Wisconsin, you have Green Bay, and then you have Door County, which is a little peninsula that goes into Lake Michigan with Whitefish Bay, and it's a very beautiful vacation area that I used to go to when I was a kid. Beautiful swimming. There are some islands there. I think it's Washington Island. Then you cross the border into Michigan, and you'll come to Escanaba, Manistee, and you keep going on US 2, you'll eventually come to St. Ignace, which is the north end of the Mackinac Bridge, the mighty Mackinac Bridge, 5 miles long. Cross the Mackinac Bridge down to Mackinac City, and then you go on the eastern shoreline of Lake Michigan. You'll go past Petoskey and Cross Village, which is nearby, just north of Petoskey. Very beautiful area. Then you'll go through Charlevoix and some little towns on your way to Traverse City. And then if you go to the peninsula, there's 2 peninsulas near Traverse City, the Old Mission Peninsula and the Leelanau Peninsula. Leelanau Peninsula is a land unto itself. It's a very beautiful area with some lakeside towns that are really beautiful, and of course tourism is big there. Then they have the dunes, one of the top tourist attractions in the country, the Sleeping Bear Dunes. And then you'll go further south to Manistee, Ludington, and then you'll go down to Saugatuck and some of the cities in southern Michigan. And Muskegon is the one I'm forgetting, another fairly large-sized city on Lake Michigan. Anyway, that's off the top of my head, some things about Lake Michigan, which was spurred on by talk of the floods down in Houston now with hurricane. Gosh, I can't remember the name of the darn hurricane, but it's in the news right now, of course. And if you get a chance to see Lake Michigan, you won't regret it. It's big. The waters in the north part of Lake Michigan are very clean. Of course, it varies throughout the lake, but if you get into the northern vacation areas, it's very beautiful. It takes on an opal color that's just breathtaking to see sometimes. So thanks for listening, and thanks for watching, and enjoy Lake Michigan. Thank you.